They buried this prophecy for 91 years, not because it was wrong, but because it was too right. A teaching so dangerous, even Cayce's own followers were warned to stay silent. What if Earth, this world, isn't a gift, but a sentence? And what if your entire life has been part of a forgotten punishment? Let's go deeper. To understand what they tried to erase, you have to go back to the man who spoke it first. Not a priest, not a scientist, a man who entered trances and returned with visions that terrified those in power. In 1924, a quiet man from Kentucky began whispering secrets that would never make it into any church sermon. His name was Edgar Cayce, and though history calls him the sleeping prophet, what he revealed while unconscious was wide awake and dangerous. Lying in a trance with his hands folded across his chest, Cayce would speak of past lives, planetary exile, and a cosmic justice system that didn't match anything in the Bible. But one reading in particular, they tried to bury it. It was Reading 11:52:11, the one that said Earth was not mankind's birthplace, but its punishment. Imagine that. A place millions call home, described not as a gift from God, but as a prison dimension for souls that betrayed higher realms. And this wasn't poetic metaphor. He meant it literally. Cayce told one woman, and only once, that her soul had descended from another realm, not fallen, but assigned here, due to choices made in another plane. Souls who misused their will, he said, were cast into materiality. Earth, then, wasn't just a physical location. It was karmic exile. But this idea had a problem. It cracked the foundation of modern Christianity, shook the walls of scientific materialism, and threatened every institution that profits from people believing Earth is all there is. So the reading was sealed, removed from public view, banned until 2015. For 91 years, even Cayce's own foundation restricted access to this single file. And when it was finally released, it was quietly uploaded to an obscure archive with no press, no fanfare, and no explanation. Ask yourself, what teaching is so volatile, so deeply unsettling that it survives a near century of suppression without a single mainstream mention? Now the veil begins to lift. And what comes next may change the way you see yourself and this world forever. You were told Earth was a school, a place to grow, to learn, to evolve. But schools are designed to elevate. This place, this system of repeating pain, forgetfulness, and loss, doesn't elevate. It traps. It cycles. It humbles. What most people don't realize is that this isn't a classroom. It's a correctional field, a vibrational quarantine, a soul rehabilitation zone wrapped in trees, oceans, and the illusion of freedom. The beauty is not a reward. It's a sedative, a tranquilizer to keep you from asking the one question that changes everything. Why are you really here? There was a moment, buried deep in a reading given in 1939, where the truth slipped out. Not metaphors, not symbolic language. A statement so raw, so clear, that it had to be locked away for 91 years. Earth, the message said, was never the beginning. It was the fallback plan, a dimensional space built for those who had misused their will in planes far above this one. Not sin, not evil, but distortion. The kind of distortion that breaks resonance with the higher harmonics of the universe. And when that distortion reached a certain threshold, containment was required, and Earth was born. Not to punish, to purify. But purification doesn't come through comfort. It comes through compression, through density, through pain. The friction of time, the erosion of ego, the repetition of heartbreak, all of it engineered not to destroy you, but to strip you, to peel back what you layered on in lifetimes before this one. Religion told you Earth was a gift, a stage for the soul to prove its worth. But the deeper current beneath all this theater tells another story. A story in which your presence here is not a cosmic celebration, but a consequence. And still, that message was only said once, hidden in a single transcript, never repeated, never expanded, just sealed away. Ask yourself why. Why would the most radical truth, the kind that explains the true nature of suffering, the recycling of souls, the deep forgetfulness, only be whispered once? Why never again? Because you were never meant to hear it with your ears. You were meant to feel it in your bones, to live it. The gravity of this world is not just physical, it's psychic, emotional. It bends your memory inward. It convinces you that the pain is personal, that the failures are random, that the patterns are just life. But they're not. They're the echo of a fracture, a split in will that took place long before you were human. You weren't sent here to succeed. You were sent here to remember why you fell. And only through that remembrance does the sentence begin to expire. But here's the fracture point. Not every soul came through the same gate. Not every being here is built on the same blueprint. Some were shaped by harmony, others by hunger. And Earth, as dense and layered as it is, became the one place that could hold them all. And that's where the distortion deepens, because some souls were never whole to begin with. Some weren't just exiled, they were malformed. You'll understand when we go deeper. You've been told that every soul is equal, that we're all cut from the same divine cloth, that we all carry the same light, simply forgotten. But if you've ever looked into the eyes of someone and felt a void staring back, if you've ever sensed that something isn't quite alive behind the surface, then part of you already knows. That isn't always true. There are souls that resonate like tuning forks, harmonizing, remembering, vibrating with frequencies that call them home. And then there are echoes, fragments, slivers of consciousness wrapped in flesh but disconnected from source. Some of them were never meant to incarnate here. They weren't ready. They weren't aligned. But resonance doesn't ask for permission, like attracts like. When enough distortion is created in one place, it becomes a magnet for all that vibrates at that frequency. And Earth, dense, chaotic, karmically charged, became that magnet. These fractured souls were pulled in, not as punishment, but as a mirror. And when they arrived, they didn't bring harmony, they brought hunger. That hunger shows up as exploitation, violence, obsession with power, control without conscience. These aren't moral failings, they're structural. It's not that these beings choose to hurt, it's that they literally cannot feel the feedback loop of suffering they create. They are energetically blind, and yet they look like you, sound like you, walk like you. This is the lie that religion cannot survive, that not all souls were made the same, and not all of them are returning to the same home. Some are here to awaken, others are here to collapse. Pain in this system is not punishment. It is architecture. It's how the soul is reshaped. When applied to a whole soul, pain reveals, burns away illusion, cracks open memory. But when applied to a fragment, pain just amplifies the distortion. That's why you've seen people go through hell and come out luminous, and others go through the same fire and become monsters. It's not about what happens. It's about what the soul is when it receives the pressure. And this is why that single reading, the one that pointed to fractured souls, broken templates, distorted echoes, was redacted, quietly sealed in the archives, not because it was inaccurate, but because it was too dangerous, too destabilizing. If people knew that some souls here cannot awaken, that some were never whole, the illusion of fairness would fall apart. The religions that preach universal salvation, the doctrines that promise everyone returns to the light, they'd crumble, because they were built for comfort, not for truth. And yet here you are, hearing what was hidden, feeling what most refuse to feel, and somewhere, inside your bones, you already knew. You've felt the difference, in relationships, in history, in crowds. You've looked around and thought, something is wrong with this place. You weren't wrong. You were seeing the fracture. And yet, if there are fragments among us, if there are beings who do not belong here, who allowed them in? Who watches the door? Who decides which souls return, which ones descend, and which ones are kept inside the loop? That brings us to the gatekeepers, the record keepers, the ones who watch but do not speak. Not every soul enters Earth by accident. Not every incarnation is random. Behind the veil of waking life, there exists a system, ancient, silent, and deeply precise. A cosmic structure hidden from every religion and philosophy that ever claimed to speak for the soul. It is the Council of Watchers. They do not rule, they do not punish, they observe, they record, they assign. They sit just beyond the edge of physical perception, not as gods, not as angels, but as administrators of energy. Their role is simple. They track the signature of your soul. Every thought, every decision, every ripple you cause in the invisible field, it leaves a mark. And those marks are added to a record, not a book, a frequency pattern. And when your pattern strays too far from harmony, from coherence, from alignment with Source, you are sent back, not because you failed, but because you are out of sync. Earth, in this context, becomes a loop, a vortex, a necessary loop of return. You don't come back because you didn't follow the rules. You come back because your energy still resonates with the density you tried to escape. You get pulled back, automatically, mechanically, no judgment, just gravity. This idea of being weighed not in morality but in resonance is not new. It was whispered through the walls of ancient Egypt, the Hall of Mot, the weighing of the heart. The belief wasn't that you were judged by what you did, but by what you had become. A feather, a heart, a scale. The heart must be lighter, not kinder, not more obedient, just lighter. The Gnostics spoke of it differently. Archons, gatekeepers between realms, challenging the soul with questions not of sin, but of awareness. The Babylonians spoke of scribes of fate. The Mayans drew celestial judges with elongated heads and expressionless eyes. Different names, same archetype. Why? Why does the same council appear across civilizations that never spoke to one another? Why the identical structure? Watchers, records, scales across continents and centuries. Because some truths are remembered beneath language. Because the soul carries memory that no culture can erase. You were born into this world with records trailing behind you. You were not clean. You were not new. You were marked, and the watchers saw you. When you sleep, when you dream, when you enter altered states, you sometimes glimpse them, not as beings, as feelings, that sense of being observed, that moment where time stops and a presence scans you without words. That is the record surfacing. And when you die, you do not stand before a throne. You enter resonance review. And if the field around you still hums with distortion, chaos, fear, you are sent back. Not out of anger, out of necessity. This is not heaven and hell. It is gravity. It is magnetism. It is resonance, physics applied to the soul. And once you understand this, once you know that everything you feel, think, and do is encoded in a structure far beyond what you call memory, you begin to realize how little of yourself you actually remember, which leads to the next fracture in the veil, because sometimes the truth leaks through in dreams, but only as much as you can handle, and only if the soul allows it. In the silence between waking and sleep, when the body releases its grip and the mind floats untethered, there exists a narrow threshold, barely perceptible, often dismissed, where the soul begins to whisper what the waking world is designed to suppress. Most dismiss their dreams as nothing more than psychological residue, strange images stitched together by an overactive subconscious. Yet, what few truly realize is that dreams are not chaos. They are fragments of your original memory, subtle messages carried through the veil, curated not by your ego, but by the soul that watches you from just behind the scenes. Edgar Cayce described dreams not as inventions of the mind, but as echoes of a much older archive, an inner library constructed before time was counted, and before the self you now recognize ever existed in flesh. These dreams are not random. They are invitations to recall who you were before you descended into density. Some dreams may feel surreal, disconnected from any logical sequence, but that's only because the language of spirit was never meant to be linear. These images, places, and feelings are transmissions, fragments of your personal genesis. There are moments where the dream feels heavier than the day, where the colors are sharper, where the sky bends in ways that your earthly eyes have never known. That is not imagination. That is leakage from your own forgotten timeline. There are those among you who have dreamed of cities made of light, of languages that use no sound, of landscapes that do not fit anywhere on a map. And you wake disoriented, not because the experience was unclear, but because your waking self is too limited to contain the scale of what you just touched. These are not dreams. These are bleed-throughs from your origin point, the echo of your existence before earth, before flesh, before fragmentation. And yet, not every soul is allowed to see everything. The soul chooses what the ego is prepared to face, and what must still be veiled. Some of your most persistent dreams, the ones that return year after year, shape-shifting but never fully leaving, are signals of unresolved memory. Not memory from this life, but from the life behind the life, the one you had before descent, when you still remembered why you were coming here in the first place. In this architecture of consciousness, the soul is not simply recording your experience. It is regulating access. The memories of who you were, of where you came from, and of why you chose this incarnation are real, but, like an ancient manuscript sealed with wax, they can only be opened when the self is strong enough to survive the implications. This is why you forget. Not because you are weak, but because the full truth would collapse the identity that keeps you grounded in this realm. The forgetting is not failure. It is a mercy. And still the truth bleeds through, in symbols, in night visions, in inexplicable dreams that seem to come from nowhere, yet leave you haunted for days. If you pay attention, these dreams reveal a path backwards, not backwards in time, but backwards in essence. To remember your origin is not to remember a place. It is to remember a frequency, a state of being that was once native to you but now feels foreign because the noise of the world has buried it. And yet, every night your soul knocks, sometimes gently, sometimes urgently, but always with a purpose. So ask yourself, in the quiet moments before waking, what recurring image, what persistent nightmare, what unshakable symbol is your soul trying to resolve? What is it trying to return to you, not from this life, but from the vast continuum that stretches behind it? Because once you remember where you came from, you begin to remember what was lost. And what was lost was not just memory. It was a civilization, not a myth, not a metaphor, but a warning encoded in stone, buried beneath water, and whispered through time. Beneath the layers of myth and metaphor, beneath the sand-choked ruins and oceanic fault lines, there lingers the trace of something once impossibly radiant. A civilization not lost, but sealed. What you were told about Atlantis, if anything at all, has been carefully sanitized, repackaged as legend or dismissed entirely as allegory. But what if it was never meant to entertain or inspire? What if it was preserved in whispers across cultures for one reason only? To warn you? Atlantis was not a fable. It was a threshold, and the beings who walked its crystalline corridors were not primitive mortals fumbling toward progress, but advanced souls carrying technologies of energy, thought, and matter far beyond what modern civilization has even begun to imagine. This was not technological superiority in the way we understand it now. It was mastery over frequency, precision in consciousness, manipulation of form through intention alone. But mastery without alignment breeds collapse, and that is what happened. What most never hear, because it was never meant to be part of the official narrative, is that the fall of Atlantis did not simply sink cities. It shattered the resonance field of the entire Earth. The consequences were not just geological, but metaphysical. When those beings began to experiment with frequency manipulation, genetic distortion, and the harnessing of inner Earth energies, they tore a hole in the delicate vibrational architecture that once allowed this realm to function as a bridge between dimensions. What followed was not punishment, but containment. Earth was reshaped not by accident or natural disaster, but by cosmic intervention. Its atmosphere was altered, its grid lines fractured, and the veil of forgetting was thickened, locking spiritual memory behind the bars of time, emotion, and density. What you call history is not the rise of civilization. It is the containment of the aftermath. Religious timelines will never allow this. To accept Atlantis as real, and more importantly, as catastrophic, would dissolve the foundational myths of linear progress and divine origin. If Atlantis existed, then so did other realms, other timelines, and beings with godlike capacities that far predate the texts the world holds sacred. It suggests that Earth is not a singular creation, but a reconstruction. Not the beginning of the soul's journey, but the point at which the soul was placed under quarantine. This forbidden angle, that Earth was not created for humanity, but reshaped to house what humanity became, remains the most destabilizing truth in the Cayce material. He never painted Atlantis as a fairy tale, but as a place of tremendous potential turned inward upon itself, a society that became so obsessed with bending reality that it severed itself from the source. And when the vibration dropped far enough, there was no going back. So, the story of Atlantis is not a celebration of a golden age. It is a mirror, a warning encrypted in flood myths, echoed in global ruins, and half-remembered in dreams of sinking cities and sky chariots that turned against their own builders. What was once an open field of spiritual evolution became a sealed testing ground, and what you call Earth became a wardened dimension. And yet, even within this prison, the soul searches for the thread it once held. But the thread is not straight. It does not move forward. It coils, it loops, it doubles back. Because your journey here is not linear. It is a labyrinth. Most people imagine reincarnation like a film reel. Frame after frame, life after life, moving forward in time as if the soul were advancing along some chronological staircase. But this notion, while comforting, is rooted in the illusion of time as a straight line. Time, as your senses experience it, is an overlay, functional but deeply deceptive. The soul does not travel in time, it moves in energy. It reincarnates not according to sequence, but according to unresolved resonance, looping through moments that match its unfinished emotional and spiritual patterns, regardless of when or where they fall on the human timeline. This is why Edgar Cayce's deeper readings disturb the neat storylines offered by organized religion and spiritual pop culture alike. He spoke of reincarnations where souls found themselves living earlier lives, inhabiting periods that, according to the physical clock, had already passed. But this is only paradoxical if you believe time is something that exists beyond the body. The truth is that your soul doesn't follow calendars. It follows frequency. And when that frequency remains distorted, chaotic, or incomplete, the soul is magnetized not forward, but inward, pulled into its own personal echo chamber. These echo chambers are not punishments. They are reflections. If you carry unresolved grief, you may be drawn to a life where that grief is externalized, played out, made visible so you can finally face it. If you carry rage or betrayal or deep spiritual disconnection, the labyrinth will present lives where that distortion is magnified, not to hurt you, but to wake you. And yet, the soul doesn't always succeed. Many wander the same corridors lifetime after lifetime, encountering the same energies in different masks, mistaking them for fate, calling them destiny, never realizing they are trapped in their own unfinished business. You've seen this in the faces of strangers who feel impossibly familiar. You've felt it in places you've never been, yet somehow long for with aching certainty. You've brushed against it in moments of synchronicity too precise to be chance. Words spoken, events triggered, doors opened exactly when the soul needed them, as if something were orchestrating your experience from behind the curtain. That something is you, or rather the memory of you, the part of you that exists outside the linear shell you currently inhabit. In this structure, reincarnation is not a ladder to climb, but a spiral to navigate. Every return is not forward progression. It is an attempt to untangle the thread. But the deeper you go, the more difficult it becomes to remember that you're in a maze at all. Most forget completely. They attach to the surface story, the career, the relationships, the daily ache. And in doing so, they confuse the set with the lesson. And so, ask yourself, what themes have followed you? What types of people do you keep attracting? What stories seem to repeat themselves no matter how far you run, or how many times you start over. These aren't coincidences, they are coordinates, the markings on your personal map back to coherence. But coherence requires awareness. Without it, the loop continues, and many loops, woven together, form something even more permanent. They form identity, and that identity, when mistaken for truth, becomes the prison. So what if you're not waiting for your destiny? What if you're just reenacting a memory you've never allowed yourself to finish? What if the feeling of being meant to do something, be somewhere, or meet someone isn't forward motion, but residue from a life you're still trying to resolve? What if you're stuck in a loop right now, and calling it purpose? And even if you were to break free from the cycle, even if you resolved the karma, faced the echo, remembered the truth, you would still be within the density of Earth. And so we arrive at the edge, not of answers, but of recognition. You were never just living a life. You were navigating a sentence, a pattern, a resonance field constructed not to punish you, but to mirror you. Earth was never meant to be easy. It was meant to be revealing. And the moment you stop asking what the world is doing to you, and start asking why your soul chose to be here now, the frequency begins to shift. This isn't about salvation. It's about alignment. Most will return again and again, mistaking routine for purpose, repeating karmic roles like a dream they can't wake from. But a few, very few, will begin to notice the loops, feel the echo, and remember the architecture beneath the veil. And for those few, the density breaks. Not all at once. Not loudly, but precisely. Because awakening doesn't look like light exploding from the heavens. It looks like quiet clarity in the middle of chaos. It feels like remembering something you were never taught. It begins when you realize you were never here to find answers. You were here to remember what was hidden. And now that you've heard it, the forgetting cannot continue.